So this is Real Stories, Real Appeal, Mastering Nonfiction Reader's Advisory with Novelist. And I have a fantastic co-host here today she'll introduce herself.
My name's Morgan, and I'm the Outreach and Assessment Librarian at the Harnett campus of Central Carolina Community College. I'm currently reading When Southern Women Cook and then The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I actually started that this morning, and it is fantastic. I'm really learning a lot. And then some things that really interest me about nonfiction are things about the environment, narrative, and then food. I really like books that I can do something with. And so I also listed the novelist plus genres so that kind of show what you might find those types of things under.
Awesome. And I'm Devin Waugh, the instruction librarian for NC Live. I'm currently reading Ocean of Sound by David Toop. It's about the history of ambient music, but it's also
Oh,
a very interesting book about like the ways that we listen to music. And so it's really interesting because it pulls in like the history of gamelan and Havanese music, but also Debussy and then musicians like Brian Eno. So it's been really interesting read so far. The key doorways for me, I call them doorways because that's what the Reader's Advisory podcast that I like to listen to call them. But the big things that draw me into books, regardless of genre, are setting and language. I love mysteries with supernatural elements. And in terms of nonfiction, I'll read pretty much anything related to music. As my current read shows, I also love any book about film or the golden age of Hollywood. So those are my nonfiction faves. And we have somebody in the chat sharing they're also a fan of Brian Eno. Awesome. I love that. So just an agenda for today. We'll start off with background, key titles, and subgenres that um, we recommend, but also titles that we found that are in Novelist or are on our TBR list. We'll do a demo of Novelist and the platform refresh, as well as some resources that they have and tips and tricks for nonfiction readers advisory. And then we'll wrap up with marketing nonfiction titles, some of the things that we recommend for promoting to patrons, but also staying up to date. And then we'll make sure there's time at the end for Q&A. So starting off with background and key titles, if folks could share in the chat, what nonfiction titles or authors do you like? Feel free to list any recent reads that you've enjoyed or authors that you love. Yeah, Bill Bryson,
oh,
Bob Dylan, Horror for Weenies. Oh, that sounds like a really fun title. Susan Orlean, yeah. Ooh, John Green.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I've heard a lot about the recent memoir Sociopath and have heard, yeah, really interesting. Nice. Kabul Beauty School. Interesting. Yeah. We are going to save all of these recommendations in the chat as well, so that they'll be in the Google Doc handout. Nice. And then our next question is, what nonfiction titles or authors do your patrons like? Are there particular ones that have been flying off the shelves this year? Are there authors that you see as being particularly buzzy among your patrons? Yeah. Oh, Clarice, that's a really good uh, mention. I like when fiction writers venture over to nonfiction, like Barbara Kingsolver or George Saunders. I am a big fan of Grady Hendrix wrote this book about mass market horror paperbacks of the 80s, which is right up my alley. Eric Larson. Yep, definitely a classic example. Um, The Art Thief. Yeah, that's definitely been a popular nonfiction read. We'll also get into some tools and novelists for finding nonfiction that has a literary style. There are a couple of tools that Novelist has created and ways that you can use things like appeal factors to find authors like Eric Larson. Nice. Thanks for sharing these in the chat. So Morgan's going to start things off with some gateway titles.
So, one of the things that I think sometimes people say about nonfiction is that it might be boring or they're afraid that it's going to get really dense and really heavy. And then also that it sort of seems to drag on. And I think these three are really great for readers who are totally either new to the genre or are trying to read more nonfiction because I think they cover a lot of bases, but they all three have a really hopeful tone and they're all written in very short chunks and sections so that you can pick it up, read it a little bit, put it down, and you're not lost along the way. And so I think it's great for taking nonfiction in like really short snippets. Best Cook in the World is a memoir and a food writing. And it's written by Rick Bragg. He's a journalist, so his style is really engaging. And then The Comfort of Crows is memoir, nature, and poetry. So that is one that's kind of intermixed with these really short essays and then some poetry, so it's really quite easy to read through really fast. And this is one of those best book clubs reads. So a lot of other people have probably read it, and it would be fun to talk about. And then I will say, Rick Bragg and Mark Rankle are both Southern writers, and I think localism is really something that people are interested in when it comes to nonfiction, and so that can be a good place to start. And then Travels with George is a travelogue and a history, and it's I would say it's like fun history. So if you like history, you have patrons that like history, but they're looking for something that's going to like kind of move and have its own personality. This is a really great example of that.
Nice. So our next key part of the nonfiction genre is history. And I wanted to put together some titles that um, are beyond the kind of typical. There are a lot of World War II history titles, love those. But I wanted to include some that are from some more recent history, as well as a tried and true classic. So, America, America came out this year. Greg Grandin is the Pulitzer Prize winning author of The End of Myth. And I think what's really interesting about this book is it weaves together the history of South America and North America. So there's a lot going on about how the identities of both continents have been shaped by each other. Challenger is about the history of the Challenger disaster, so a relatively recent one, event in the grand scheme of things. But another great bestseller that I think we're just going to see a lot more um, history books about the late 80s, 90s, 2000s in the next several years. Another one that I didn't include is called When the Clock Broke, and it's about um, Ross Perot, but also some other key figures in the early 90s. And it was just a really engaging read. And I'll include that one in the Google Doc. The Devil in the White City was one that Morgan and I thought was just tried and true classic and entry point for folks if they have not read Eric Larson because of his style.
Mm-hmm.
It can just be a really nice, engaging story. National Book Award finalist, but also one that I think has always been in this kind of development purgatory where it's like it might be adapted into a movie at some point. Who knows? There's always been talks about it. But yeah, just a very interesting, engaging read. Definitely on the more macabre side. So your fans of true crime might like it.
Mhm.
but it might be a little too grisly for some folks, given the subject area. And then science writing is another core part of nonfiction. So Morgan's going to kick things off with The Genius of Birds.
Okay, y'all, this book. It's like if you have patrons who love birds, this is the book. This I loved this book. I thought it was great, but I also think that if you have someone who is like really into bird watching and is interested in knowing more about birds and how they sort of think, this can be a really great title. And then if they love it and they're like, this, I want more, she has several other books that are about birds. Like there's The Bird Way, that's how birds work in social connection with each other. And then she also just published What an Owl Knows. So it's all about owls. And so I think that if people really love her writing style and the topic of birds, there's always more for them to read.
I included the title More Everything Forever by Adam Becker because Novelist has included a lot more. They've added a curated reads list about artificial intelligence, but there's a lot more being published about AI and Silicon Valley and tech companies, a lot more journalists writing about this topic. So I wanted to pull that one as a good example. It came out in the last year. Night Magic by Leanne Henyon. She is a writer in Western North Carolina, so would be a great pick for an author talk or some sort of programming. But I just found this title to be really engaging and interesting. Um, Another thing that I think is a good tip for using Novelist is searching for graphic adaptations of nonfiction reads. So The Hidden Life of Trees was a typical, print format, and then Peter Wolleben adapted it into a graphic novel. One thing that you can do in Novelist is just put graphic adaptation in like quotation marks, and then search for titles from like the last 2 or 3 years, and then see what new graphic adaptations have been made, whether it's for a younger audience, YA, adult audience, because that's another way that your folks who really love graphic novels can get into some nonfiction, and vice versa. Patrons who love science writing might explore the format of graphic novels using that tip. And then getting into biography and memoir, I pulled together a couple of titles that have been published in the last year. John Lewis, A Life. So this is a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Really fantastic read. I'm a huge fan of Hanif Abdurraqib, who was a MacArthur Fellow. There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension is a memoir, and it's kind of sports nonfiction as well. He is a fantastic poet and nonfiction writer. I think he's now working on publishing nonfiction as well, but I'm just a huge fan of whatever he writes. So that's one that I recommend, especially for folks who maybe want like basketball as their kind of entry point or sports nonfiction. When the Going Was Good by Graydon Carter. So Graydon Carter was the editor of Vanity Fair from, I want to say, like 1990 to 2017. This is chock full of just like a lot of stories and fly on the wall situations. It was published this year and has received a lot of praise. I like picking out memoirs that aren't always like the big buzzy celebrity memoirs, but are kind of some different figures in history, or kind of sharing their roles in particular fields. And then another thing about this aspect of nonfiction is there are a lot of memoirs of like people who are not celebrities or don't have a particular renown. And I find that those graphic memoirs in particular are a great way to highlight um, an author's voice and their own personal experience, family history. So, Feeding Ghosts is about Tessa Holes. It is three generations of a family. The illustrations are beautiful. There's a lot of intrigue and heartbreak that happens in this family dynamic, and it's also a Pulitzer Prize winner. So, another good pick to highlight. I didn't want to have like a separate graphic novel or graphic format section because I just think that they can kind of go really seamlessly with other uh, subgenres of nonfiction. And Morgan will take over the business and financial.
So Devin and I were kind of talking when we were looking at business and financial is just like the shift that's taken place in some of these books. It used to be, I think, I mean, they're a dime a dozen, and they've all got tips for like what you're supposed to do to like make more money or like gain status, and like those books are cool and everything, and you can totally recommend those, and patrons might want those. But there has been kind of a shift. Like the psychology of money talks less about like this is how you get more money and more about the ways that we think about money and how we behave around it. And so sort of those big picture things that have other things infused with them, like psychology, rather than just spreadsheets and numbers. And then I'm going to talk about finance for the people. That one is really interesting because it does have a little bit more. This is what you should do to get a grip on your finances, but the tone is very different. It is not, it's very much written for like millennials. Even Gen Z would probably be like super into it. And it's got sort of tone and language that I think what your typical reader of finance books would be like, oh, that's quite bold. And so I would say that the tone is just different in the shift of who's reading what now. And then also, of course, I highlighted Brene Brown because I think she really represents a shift in nonfiction for leadership, where I think you have more of the human perspective, where you've got that sort of lead with vulnerability. And of course, she's got a new book coming out called Strong Ground. So if your readers really like Brene Brown, or are looking for a different way of approaching leadership, then she's a great option.
And music. Okay, so here are a couple that I picked out. I'm a big fan of music history and especially like particular scenes and moments in history. So talking Greenwich Village was right up my alley. Um, the folk scene in the 60s. Somebody mentioned Bob Dylan in the chat. If you haven't read this one, it's so good. I'm also a huge fan of jazz, and so I wanted to recommend this one by Larry Tye, The Jazzmen, How Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Count Basie Transformed America. That came out in the last year as well and is fantastic. And another one that might be lesser known, I actually found this one through searching like best of nonfiction 2024 and novelist instead of finding it in my own way. I live in Chapel Hill and I actually didn't realize this book existed until I found it in Novelist. And it's a really strange and wonderful time about the Chapel Hill music scene in the late 80s and 90s. So here are a couple that I think are great beyond just like the typical music memoir. And I highly recommend just, there are a lot of really good recommendations. One thing that you can do in Novelist that I'll show is you can use the search for more section underneath a particular title to find other like nonfiction titles within that subgenre. So if you want to find more music books that are about alternative music or about jazz or folk music, you can use that tool on the book level page. Um, for travel writing, here are two that stand out and I think represent two different types of travel writing. One is the travel writing of like the writer's experience in a new land, a high stakes adventure situation, um, very much you kind of walking with the writer through their own experience. But A Walk in the Park, the true story of a spectacular misadventure in the Grand Canyon, is that kind of like Cheryl Strayed's Wild, where you're sort of on the hike with them or in the country where the writer is writing. Is A River Alive is a little bit more on the side of like philosophical, thinking through our sense of place, raises the questions of like are, this philosophical question of like, are rivers living beings? Like, how do we relate to the bodies of water that cut through our communities? Um, by Robert Macfarlane, who's a British author. And I felt like that was kind of an interesting pick that represents less of the journey per se, but more of like our relationship to nature. There's a lot in that side of things if you're into that. Um, and then for sports, I picked out a couple. Morgan picked out the first two, which right now there's a lot of buzz about Bill Belichick, and he put out The Art of Winning earlier this year. That's one that might draw in potentially. We talked about this before, but I think that with sports nonfiction, it's a great way to um, encourage like men who are readers and patrons of the library to find titles. I know that family members of mine, like this is their go-to for nonfiction, is sports nonfiction. Morgan also picked out Why We Love Football, a History in 100 Moments. I picked out Uncommon Favor by Dawn Staley because I think that this is a fantastic memoir, but it's also sports nonfiction and about her relationship to basketball. She's a huge figure in women's basketball. And with the rise of Caitlin Clark, I think there's a lot of attention and focus on women in sports and women's basketball. And so this is a nice memoir that came out in the last year that your patrons might be interested in reading. Homestand is by Will Bardenwerper, who is a journalist. It's about these minor league baseball teams around the United States and how, through deindustrialization, like some of these minor league teams might shutter, and what that, says about our relationship to sports, to baseball in particular, to these sort of community spaces that sports provides. And so I felt like this was kind of more of like a philosophical read of sports nonfiction that also raises a lot of contemporary issues in an interesting way.
I was going to say about the Why We Love Football.
Mhm.
If I think I'm speaking from a community college perspective, but I would go outside walking around the campus, and I would see the students, the male students in particular, playing football, and I thought, well, we don't have a lot of books on that. Let's see if we can purchase some. And so we did, and that book, Why We Love Football, got checked out almost immediately. As soon as we were finished processing it, somebody came in and checked it out. So we had got some of Joe Posnanski's other books, like on baseball, like 50 Great Moments and 100 Great Players. And so what I would say is like, if you do happen to work in an environment where your library is perhaps close to where your patrons interact with their outside events, maybe what do they like to do? And then that might draw them in. I mean, there's no guarantee that what they like to do will indicate their reading interests, but it might be a place to start.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, Morgan, do you want to share about the Central Carolina Community College Book Club?
Yeah, so the book club is for faculty and staff, and we read short articles. Instead of reading like entire books, we read an article or a short story every month. And we just meet on Zoom on, I think it's normally the last Friday at 1 o'clock. And we discuss what we've read. We started off reading a lot of short stories that were fiction, and as we have sort of grown, we've gotten more and more people who read different things, and so we started to read a lot more nonfiction. We're going to read in coming up an article on pickleball, and then we're going to play pickleball. So we're trying different things for faculty and staff to see what they like, and nonfiction has been really good in helping us sort of cover, I would say, broad interests in a more direct way. So we've read some nature essays, and we're obviously reading the article about pickleball, and I think we've got another one about like relationships and community. And so really like using those nonfiction things to kind of meet everybody's interests in the book club.
Yeah, that's such a great way to connect with the broader campus. So we're going to switch gears and cover using Novelist. So one thing that I wanted to, as a reminder, share is novelists, 56% of the recommendations are fiction, 44% are nonfiction. So that's still a lot of nonfiction titles that are in the platform. Um, you're going to see more with nonfiction, history, nature, arts, true crime, then like hobby books or DIY or certain smaller type, smaller press titles. And the same thing goes for fiction as well. Like there's just more popular titles, but you're sometimes not going to see books that were published like in the UK or from other countries. You might see a translation if a title's been translated um, for an US audience. But one thing that's really nice about the platform is you can find titles regardless of age or interest. So I'll also show you ways that you can find nonfiction recommendations for younger readers as well. Within novelists, they categorize titles by their story elements. So the genres of nonfiction being things like science or travel or true crime or history, but also appeal factors. So appeal factors are related to the pacing, the writing style, um, sometimes like the mood overall of it. Themes are more used to really categorize fiction than nonfiction. Themes are like the common tropes in a particular genre, like in romance, fake relationship, or Grumpy Sunshine is an example of a romance theme. And then another way that you can search for nonfiction titles is by subject. I tend to use keywords to search for nonfiction titles because it's not as you know, easy to plug in like as I normally would with like romance or mystery, where I start by like narrowing maybe by genre if I'm looking for kind of a broad scan of a genre to stay up to speed. With nonfiction, I like using subject filters on the right-hand side of the search results pages and then adding in things like time period and place. I think that's useful. Um, Especially when working with patrons, if you do know that they love reading nonfiction about a particular period of history, like their go-to is, Civil War history, um, using that those filters of subject, time, and place are useful as well. And place, I mean like United States, but also a particular city, a region, and then internationally looking at particular parts of the world and countries as well. Um, One thing that I think is a really great entry point for nonfiction exploration in novelists are the curated lists. These are available on the left-hand side of the page, and they're organized by age range. Here's a sample of a couple. So for adult readers, they have armchair travel as an example. I always think looking out for the best ofs for 2024, but also for 2025 when that comes out is a good practice. Must read graphic nonfiction. And they also keep track of like 2025 faves so far for teens. And then for younger readers, they have picture book faves for nonfiction and then teen as well. For younger readers, they have a lot related to like inspiring heroes or hidden figures. Nature is another one where you can find a lot of great nonfiction picture books or easy readers. Um, just another tip for finding nonfiction for younger readers is using when you search for a particular topic. Like one thing that I've found when I talk to public libraries around the state and ask about like what titles or books are popular amongst your readers, I get things like all my kids, and their parents, they love finding books about dragons or dinosaurs. One thing that you can do is like put in dragons in the search bar in the homepage and then narrow by reading level or age. Like check the box for award winners to see if there's a particular picture book that's won an award related to dragons. One that came up is Dragon Bones, which is this picture book about Mary Anning, who is one of the first kind of like pre paleontologists in England in the 19th century. There's a lot of nonfiction related to animals and nature, so Tooling Around was a good pick. Elizabeth, Queen of the Seas is about a sea lion that lives in a river in New Zealand, and this is a true story that was a winner of the Caldecott Medal. There's been such a huge surge of graphic novel nonfiction for younger readers. Like, I feel like there's a lot for middle grades and YA that's now in that graphic novel format. Mexikid by Pedro Martin is a graphic memoir that's very funny. It could be a great entry point for a middle grade reader who um, maybe is a reluctant reader, but just wants something funny. And I think the graphic novel, because of its illustrative qualities, can be a nice gateway for um, reluctant readers of younger ages. Sunshine is another one that's a little bit more serious. It's the writer of this graphic novel and creator worked at a camp for kids who have cancers and health conditions. And so it's a lot more gravity to that title than Mexikid, um, but might be a good suggestion for somebody who's looking for something very moving and emotional. Sapiens, a graphic history, is another good one for YA audience. There's so much nonfiction and also fiction that's just been adapted to the graphic novel format that's useful to check out. I always like in finding nonfiction titles for younger readers to like check the filter for award winners just to see what's been popular or recognized, um, and then kind of searching from there. Another tip in novelists before we get into the platform is they have this search called GN Nonfiction that reads like fiction. And if you enter that into the search bar, it will show you every title they categorize with that description. So this is great for finding if you know your patrons love Eric Larson or other literary nonfiction, finding more titles. So the Art Thief came up in the chat. Um, if your patrons loved The Art Thief and they want more in that writing style that's really gripping and engaging, Watergate: A New History is another. The Mesopotamian Riddle about an archaeologist, a soldier, a clergyman, and the race to decipher the world's oldest writing is fun because it has that kind of like high stakes plot that's very gripping. And then Brave the Wild River is about the two women who mapped the botany of the Grand Canyon. That could be kind of more on the travel writing side of things, but I wanted to use it as an example of using the search because I think it's such a good shortcut in the platform. You can also find the nonfiction that reads like fiction genre guide. These genre guides are great because they give you key titles, why readers like this particular subgenre, authors to watch, and then some sample searches you can try. And then at the end, they have marketing tips for fans of the particular subgenre. So I'll show you all how to get to that, but we'll jump into novelists now. All right, so as you may have noticed, Novelist has undergone a platform refresh. One of the things that they have added to the top of the homepage is this Books with Buzz section. I think it's a great tool for finding nonfiction because it shows titles that have been mentioned on news shows, podcasts, radio shows that have been buzzy. Often those titles that are mentioned in media outlets tend to be more nonfiction than fiction. And so you can see a couple here. This is always a rotating list as well. Um, and so you can see this music book about the making of Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. Um, they have here Peter Guralnick has written a lot of the definitive biographies about Elvis Presley. He has a new one about um, the Elvis's relationship with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, um, which was mentioned on Fresh Air in July. But that's something that you can use is like clicking on the particular title. It takes you to the book item page, and then you have some read-alikes that you can explore. as well as this, like, about this book. It used to be called Search for More, but what you could do is find more arts and entertainment, music industry books, richly detailed. And then I have 71 books that I can search for from that list. So that's something that's been added that's a little beyond read alikes because it allows you to plug in like story elements, such as richly detailed, as an example. Um, Within Novelist, I'll show y'all that curated read section. So that's always on the left-hand side of the page, and I can explore all curated lists. Um, and one thing that I'll do, because this looks a little different than it used to, is check the box for nonfiction. And there's 28 recommended reads lists for nonfiction. I could narrow this further to be about audience level. So if I want to take a look at just the nonfiction recommended reads list for under 8, I can see here inspiring heroes, daring women and girls, nature, trees. Let's say I want to find some cool nature picture books, and I see this one from June called In the World of Whales, Firefly Song, Lynn Fearson Frost, and the Great Smoky Mountain Discovery. So here are some others. My Pollinator Garden. And so that's one thing that I really like about these curated lists is once you add in the filters, you can explore a little bit more from there. But as you can see, if your patrons are um, looking for more nonfiction related to the rise of AI, they can find this recommended reads list. Um, and it includes a combo of things related to guides, history, um, biography as well. Whenever you just want to clear your search and get back to the homepage, click on the Novelist Plus logo on the top left corner. Um, you can see here on the homepage, they have their curated lists that they use to spotlight some different examples. So if you want to look at must-read nature and science, that's another recommended reads list that they include on the homepage. Um, they have new series titles, which is not as relevant for nonfiction. One thing that you can do is use that quick link section on the left-hand side and then click genre guides. Um, and this is where you can find graphic novels for older kids. I'm going to check that box for nonfiction and see what nonfiction guides they have. Let's see. All right, I'm seeing graphic novels for older kids or graphic novels for teens. And I can see some examples of why older kids like graphic novels and see if there's any nonfiction recommendations in here. Um, Ruth Chan is one that's a memoir, so graphic novel memoir. I'm going to also do GN nonfiction that reads like fiction and enter, see these searches. So um, it's organized it by the latest titles. This is one about the making of the Billy Wilder movie Sunset Boulevard. I can scroll through here. One thing that I like to do is use the publication date filter and limit, particularly to the last 5 years, especially when I'm looking for recent recommendations and moving beyond the standard picks. What's nice is I get this all is chronological from most recent. So I can see some examples here. And then look through this example from July and explore some titles that way as well. For GN nonfiction that reads like fiction, I can look at lists and articles, and it pulls up the genre guide. Um, As I mentioned, these get updated regularly by novelist staff and then volunteers, writers from different libraries. Here are some key titles. Brave the Wild River is used as an example. Bill Bryson, Eric Larson, Mary Roach, who's a fantastic science writer. Um, and then here are the marketing tips. So, professional reviews are often helpful for identifying what makes a given book fit into the genre. Look for language like told with a novelistic flair, pacing like a thriller, reads like a novel. Um, and then some helpful searches to try, like page to screen nonfiction that reads like fiction, or action packed nonfiction that reads like fiction, or nonfiction book club best bets. So that's something that I've found is a great shortcut. For your fans of Bill Bryson, you can click on that to see the author level page and author read alikes. For recommending for a patron, if your library's catalog is linked to novelists, that's a great way for the patron to then explore within the platform and see what's available in your library. Um, but if you have your diehard patrons who are always coming looking for recommendations or they read voraciously, they might want to explore the platform and use the uh, author title read alikes as a great starting point. So talking with a patron and seeing, okay, you're a good fan, you're a big fan of Bill Bryson, entering Bill Bryson into the search bar and then finding recommendations that way is great. Um, Nonfiction book club best bets. This is another sample search that they provide. Um, and again, I can limit the publication date to the past 5 years and see Killers of the Flower Moon as an example. And this biography about Pope John Paul I. So I'm going to go back to the homepage um, and I'm going to show you an example of using keywords in the search bar. So let's say I want to find a title related to, let me see here, the Jazz Age. I can just enter in these key terms and then I will click nonfiction and then I will narrow down by audience for adult recommendations. I can also see here time period, make sure it's specifically 20th century or 1920s. And then I can add in location if I wanted to. Like if I only wanted the titles to be about the Jazz Age in New Orleans, I could find 6, or Chicago or New York City, and then click apply. And then here I can add in filters like award winner. And now I see 7 results. And so I have this example of a title about the Jazz Age. I can also, if I just want it to be about the 1920s, I can do that. I can also switch and put jazz music. And I can uncheck the filter for location if I wanted to. And revise that. I'm just going to look for book recommendations and see some different examples. One thing that you can do as well is put in like, let's see, city planning as a particular topic. One thing that Morgan and I discussed as we were planning this webinar is nonfiction, unlike fiction, allows for kind of this sporadic exploration of tastes and interests. And so a reader might read everything related to Bob Dylan, But there's also a lot of readers who might read one book on Bob Dylan and then kind of explore and say, I really want to get into reading some books about city planning or about, um, the history of London in, late medieval times. There's a way that you can kind of, through programming, through displays, through using Novelist, pique that interest and allow for a little bit more exploration. And as Morgan added in the chat, some patrons are just curious about literally everything and anything, and they just want to dabble and explore those interests. So let's say I'm looking for a book on city planning and I want it to be an award winner. And then through nonfiction, I have this book, Walkable City by Jeff Speck. Jane Jacobs is a very key figure in urban planning. Um, and then some other examples here. One thing that you can do is use that subject tag. So let's say I want to find more related to urban planning in the 20th century. And now it's giving me 34 different titles. Let's say I want to find what's been published in the last 5 years. Again, this is not everything that's been published on urban planning in the last 5 years. It's just what Novelist has in its collection and what has typically is just more popular nonfiction. Um, and you can see some examples here. Um, Soul City as one that was published in 2021. And then some others here, like if I wanted to explore North Carolina history writing, let's see what 68 recommendations they have. Um, I can see, let me limit to the last 5 years and then browse here. So there are a couple of titles. One's about the 1979 Greensboro Massacre. Um, and what's nice is you get that Goodreads rating, but um, let's see what else can browse here. One thing with nonfiction as well is it's often a spotlight on these hidden figures in history and kind of these stories that don't make it to um, history textbooks or, they're figures of minor renown. So there's a lot of really interesting biographies. I'm going to jump back into the homepage. And one thing that I'll show as well is if you click on Book Club Best Bets, one thing that we can do is add in nonfiction and then add in the appeal factors that I mentioned. So illustration is more like if it's a graphic novel or a comic or a picture book. Um, if you're looking for audiobook recommendations, you have this filter that you can check here that I'm showing called Read by the Author. That's something I love for nonfiction, especially for memoir. I find it so gripping to feel like you're almost, in conversation or, the author's right in the room with you when you have that audiobook that's read by an author. And then here I can look at, I can limit it to the last 10 or the last year if I wanted to, the last 12 months, and see, okay, here are some recommendations for audiobooks that are read by the author. And then I can explore further from here if I wanted to click on this title that has received some recognition and mentioned this year. similar to Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, which is an all-time fave of mine. But it seems like this is a very reflective story about families and memoir about grief and um, dementia. And so, something that's very moving and personal. And I can see here some appeal factors and subjects used. Got something in the chat here. Totally agree about the read by author. Yeah, it's if you search like, let's say I wanted to find something related to using the search bar is also really easy when it's about a particular period in time, like World War II. I'm going to add in books. Actually, let's see here. If I search that and then add in the filter. Let's see for audio characteristics. Try that. Feel like audio characteristics should come up. Yeah, there we go. So audio characteristics. And then you can search here read by author. And it's going to give me 165 audiobooks about World War II that are read by the author. And then I can explore further and I can check a box for award winner, as I like to do, to see some good examples like this oral history of D-Day. That's an award winner. So one thing that we're going to do, because we have some time left and we want to make sure there's time for questions, is we want to talk through helping readers. So one thing that's useful is using Novelist and checking the boxes for those appeal factors and not just by subject. So asking a reader what they enjoyed. Was it the topic? Was it the tone? Was it the style? And using some of those limiters on the right-hand side can be a nice way to find recommendations. As an example, somebody who loved The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks might not want another book on science necessarily. They might want narrative nonfiction that blends biography, ethics, and history more so. And sometimes that requires just like a little bit more conversation. Um, Even the opportunity for like a reader's advisory form on the library's website. We've seen member libraries use that as a way to um, give library staff more time to find recommendations and really help readers branch out beyond the tried and true staples. One thing that I think is useful is the for nonfiction appeals framework. It's a little bit different than fiction, but it's thinking through like, what's the subject? What is it about? Is it about birds? Is it about Southern cooking? What is the approach, that writing style? Is it more conversational? Is it more journalistic? What's the tone? And what's the pacing and depth? So is it going to be something that's more of a breezy overview? Is it more of a deep dive? Is it very gripping or is it a little bit on the slower side? Um, and then Morgan is going to share some tips for finding forthcoming titles.
So it can be kind of challenging because there is so much nonfiction out there to explore. I would say one of the best things to look for is Kirkus reviews, because it is going to allow you to select book reviews and then you can limit to just nonfiction and you can typically look months and months ahead of time. I like it because it tends to cover some things that might get overlooked in other book reviews like the New York Times or something that is going to be a little bit more, I don't want to say maybe not as popular, but it's going to be very subject specific. So Kirkus reviews would typically cover that. And then also, I just really love to walk around Barnes and Noble and see what they have picked and see what they think is interesting for their, upcoming or current nonfiction, and say, okay, well, if they can sell it, then we could probably, as a library, purchase it. And then readers would want to read more of it.
Yeah, these are all really good recommendations. Just some questions to ask readers. So I'm not going to read all of them, but these are good if you're having a conversation with a reader or they stop you after a book club or a program and want to ask you for recommendations or on the desk. Um, so thinking through tone, authors that they've enjoyed in the past. Um, Comfort as well. Is the reader looking for escaping into a topic they're unfamiliar with, or something that's a little bit more breezy, or something that challenges your thinking or teaches you something new? Like the reader that's coming in and is maybe looking for like a fun celebrity memoir that's read by the author is maybe not looking for the deep philosophical read about nature, like, and vice versa. They might eventually, but just kind of figuring out what's the level of escape, as I like to think about it, is useful for readers advisory. And then thinking through, do you want, there's some readers who love reading things that are buzzy and popular and keeping up with that. Or are they looking for more of a hidden gem and really using novelists to your advantage? I like to, with every reader's advisory webinar that we do, kind of do these think like a readers because I think these are great ways to hand sell a particular title, include it in a display, and just like have it jump out for a patron. So, for readers who like their history with a side of espionage, Book and Dagger: How Scholars and Librarians Became the Unlikely Spies of World War II. This is a nonfiction that reads like fiction pick from novelist. I know I mentioned women's sports for the fan of the WNBA because that fandom is grown exponentially and there's a lot of interest in Caitlin Clark as a player. This is a new title that came out this year. As I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of film history, and so if you've ever wondered how Meryl Streep learned how to steal every scene, The Method by Isaac Butler, How the 20th Century Learned How to Act, is fantastic. It's also a nice bridge for readers who might have listened to like Al Pacino's memoir that was put out last year or are interested in film history in that way. I love Isaac Butler as a film critic and writer, so that's something that I think is useful. Here are a couple of awards. We've included the YALSO Award for YA nonfiction, but here are some others we've linked into the Google Doc for you all to see as well. But really thinking through like the National Book Award for nonfiction, the long list and short list for that, the National Book Critics Circle Award, there's nonfiction titles there as well as the Pulitzer. Um, and then for NC Live ebook and audiobook collections, our homegrown collection is our collection that we purchase titles to and provide access. They're unlimited simultaneous use, so there's no holds or wait lists. An entire community can read the same book at the same time. We have a lot of local history. From North Carolina, from Duke University Press and UNC Press. We have tons of cookbooks. I'm a huge fan of a cookbook that I can just look up on my phone because I don't like having a print book right near my stove. There's a lot of travel books that are not just regional travel books, but there's hiking and gardening guides, bird watching books. So these are all also now in Libby. So one thing to share with readers is um, they can find all of these titles there. Some libraries have created like a curation on their Libby homepage. If you want to add that, just email help@nclive.org and we can work with Overdrive to help y'all get set up with that. Um, Nonfiction and Hoopla. So Hoopla is primarily an audiobook resource for us. So we have some ebooks, but it's mostly audiobooks. One thing I love about Hoopla is the wait times are much shorter. In Libby, sometimes, especially if a title's just been released, I'm waiting like months for to get off that holds list. But I find if I request a hold in Hoopla, I usually get a notification within a week or so that it's ready to be read. There's tons. There are some Bill Bryson titles. There's David Sedaris. There's sports nonfiction like Phil Jackson's memoir and Moneyball. Laura Hillenbrand, who's also a popular nonfiction author. Haruki Murakami wrote a memoir about running, and Devil in the White City is available as an audiobook in Hoopla. Um, ebook Central also has a lot of nonfiction titles. I think it's a hidden gem for a lot of crafting, woodworking, DIY. If your patrons are looking for titles related to like home repair, home improvement, there's a bunch in ebook Central. It's kind of seen as an academic library resource, but there's a lot for a public library audience there. More history, hiking guides, cookbooks as well, gardening. And so one thing that ebook Central allows you to do is if you're in your like desktop or laptop, you can download PDFs of chapters and sections of chapters. Um, it's good for a patron that might be wanting a quick answer to a topic, like I need a book on dog training, or I need a book about, um, you know, gardening hacks and tips. That's great for quick use, but you can also for our member libraries, eBook Central has launched a new app this summer, and that means that Adobe Digital Editions will be kind of phased out as the option for downloading an entire book to read offline. If you want more details about that, I've linked to it on this slide. But libraries will kind of choose to migrate in uh, sort of sections. And so if you want more details about that, it's included on the slide deck and it will be in the Google Doc as well. Quick tips about marketing. So, outreach ideas. These are two examples of nonfiction events with authors happening this month in North Carolina. Um, Reach out to your local bookstore to potentially partner. Invite regional authors. I think nonfiction authors don't always have the support for like long book tours or things like that. They rarely do. And it's often their, you know, nonfiction writing might not be their primary job. And so I think there's a plethora of nonfiction writers in North Carolina and reaching out to them to talk about their latest book, um, especially if it connects to history of the state or the region, is a great way to offer a library program. Some tips for displays. I've seen great examples of like a nonfiction fiction double display. So having a fiction title and then providing a nonfiction recommendation that might be related to like a time period or a subject that comes up in the fiction book is a nice way to kind of encourage broader reading beyond people's tastes. Offering like bundles of two or three titles on a particular theme or topic can be great. So, you know, three books about football, three books about, you know, 1960s music can be a nice way to curate tastes. Read-alikes for buzzy titles is great. And then focusing on a particular theme or subject or time period. I loved this November display because I think that there's a lot of love for doing Halloween displays and spooky season stuff, which I'm a big fan of. But I think November is sometimes this weird bridge month between December and October, and I love the idea of making it about promoting nonfiction. Um, QR codes next to book displays, linking to curated lists of novelists or genre guides or read-alikes can be a great way to help readers branch out. Targeting readers with print. So we have the ability to order print materials from novelists through our website, and you can put bookmarks in holds by the service desk and then buy displays or book bundles. Linking to your catalog. If you're interested in setting that up, always know that you can email help@nclive.org. But this is a nice way that readers can see what's immediately available at your library. And with that, we have time for questions. Any questions about nonfiction readers advisory? One thing that I'm going to share quickly that I skipped over with Novelist is the advanced search. So it's a little hidden, but if you click on advanced search, this allows you to, and click on filters. This is another way that you can limit by reading level or Lexile range or accelerated reader interest level for parents, and then media mentions. So you can see on a particular title if it's been mentioned on a TV show, podcast, but you can just select Good Morning America and then see all the titles in the last 12 months that have been mentioned on Good Morning America. So I have the John Lewis biography as an example. One thing I can do is sort the list here. Let me see if I can sort this list. I know there's a way. Um, let's see. Filters, source type. I'm just going to check the box for books. There we go. If you change relevance to date newest, let's say you have a patron that said there's a nonfiction title that was mentioned on Good Morning America recently. Um, it's got a blue cover, and then maybe it's this memoir, semi well adjusted despite literally everything, or it might be this biography about JFK and so on. But that advanced search is also great if you want to just limit to a reading level. So let's say I just want to find nonfiction for third grade. I can click search and then filter nonfiction. And let's say I want to use another filter if I want it to be about a particular time period, like I want it to be about ancient Egypt, nonfiction for third graders about ancient Egypt. And I can sort it by relevance or newest. And then I can see this example here. So that's one way that you can really use the filters and that advanced search to narrow by reading level. You can always add in reading level as a filter, but that's something that you can do to kind of cast a wide net and actually figure out, all right, I just want to look for titles for fourth graders. This is a good thing to share with your teachers in your school district if you have partnership or outreach with your local school district. But that's one way to find titles that are reading level appropriate. Any questions in the time that we have left? Always know that you can reach out to us after. So I've included our emails. If you have any questions about using Novelist or about NC Live ebook or audiobook collections, always know that you can reach out. I'm just going to share this handout that put together of some support materials from Novelist. They have a great blog and newsletter if you want to sign up for updates. That's how I stay up to date with all their offerings. I've linked to award winners, some of the podcasts that I love for keeping up with Reader's Advisory, um, some general support, some titles that we've mentioned today, as well as the audiobooks and Hoopla for nonfiction. Here's a more exhaustive list. So I couldn't fit all of them on one slide. And then I'll add in some of the authors and titles mentioned in the chat. But with that, I will share that we have two upcoming Readers Advisory webinars this fall. Next month, I'll be co-hosting a webinar on horror Readers Advisory for libraries, covering recommendations for middle grades, YA, and adult readers. And then in November, I'll be co-hosting a webinar on romantasy. And that will be with a public librarian who hosts a very popular romantasy book club at her library. So keep an eye out for those. I've included the registration form if you'd like to sign up for those. But thank you all for joining us this afternoon.